Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Study Abroad podcast, or the Do AbroadCast. Today, I'm interviewing Gavin, who studies abroad in Cuba, and I'm really excited to chat with him about his experience. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm Gavin. As Kata said, I'm studied abroad in Cuba, I guess about a full year ago now, in the fall quarter of 2023. Yeah, it was an amazing experience. I studied with a program with IFSA that the university set up and everything, and went to La Universidad de La Havana, one of the oldest universities in Cuba, and actually one of the oldest in all the Americas as well,
Really?
Predating even some Ivy League institutions in the United States.
Humble brag.
Humble brag.
Very cool. Very cool.
It was yeah, as I'm sure everyone says, it was a transformational experience.
Yes, so transformative. But it's true. People say it for a reason. No, that's really cool. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Cuba only recently opened up like exchange programs for American students, right?
Yes.
So you're kind of in the first couple of years, the first couple of cohorts of American students studying abroad in Cuba, which is really cool.
Yeah. And actually, because I remember when I was applying for the program and looking to get in, I'm studying international studies and I have a minor in Spanish, and I was looking at different places to go. I wanted to go somewhere where I could really test my Spanish speaking abilities and get a lot better. And Cuba seemed like a great place where I could kind of throw myself into the deep end in terms of both Spanish and international studies. But I had an amazing time. And basically, so what the program looked a little bit like was I was in this like in a neighborhood like pretty central to Havana, called Vidalo. And it's like pretty old neighborhood. And it was really beautiful. So partially because you could just walk down the street and see, like if you're into architecture, you could see like on like the span of 2 blocks, different architectural styles all throughout the 20th century.
That's so cool.
Art Deco building here, kind of like mid-century modern building here, like old picturesque Spanish style architecture in the next one and stuff. But it was maybe like a 15-minute walk to a university. And I did a good deal of walking when I was there. Got myself some new shoes and wore them out by the end of it.
That's how to do it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I would take some really cool classes in the building over there at University of Havana. So
yeah, and all your classes were in Spanish.
They were, yes,
Okay.
yes. I did take one class that was a Spanish class in the school for non-Spanish speakers.
Okay.
FENI, I think, Facultad para No Hispanohablantes, or something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
But it was pretty cool. I took my Spanish class with me and the other Americans in my program, as well as one class, History of the Cuban Revolution, a sociology class on sociology of labor, and another class on sociology and psychology.
Okay.
Kind of like a little intersecting class and everything. And had a really interesting, and the sociology of gender also was another interesting one.
Like very difficult classes I feel like to take in Spanish. Did that? I don't know, how was that? And were those mostly with Cubans, or was that mostly with like foreign students? Yeah.
So the only class where that wasn't majority Cuban students was my Spanish class.
Okay.
My Spanish class was 5 students, and it was all Americans. All the rest of my classes, it was me and like a couple Americans or foreigners sprinkled in.
Okay.
There's a couple Germans as well, actually, which was interesting. I have a funny story there, but I'm not going to get into it. It was just a couple of us international students like sprinkled in with all the rest of the Cubans, Cuban students there and everything, which was amazing because, and something I really, really enjoyed about that program is that like I just made friends with Cubans in my classes and stuff. And there was like was difficult, you know, a little bit with the language barrier and stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
But like we still got to be pretty close, and it was an amazing experience. So yeah. And yeah, I mean, kind of actually answering your question, you asked a second ago. Yeah, some of those classes were pretty difficult. We had like 1 week period at the beginning of the semester where we could like shop. It was like a shopping period where we could go to different classes and like before we finalized our course schedule. Yeah. Because like unlike how most of the rest of the world works, actually, you know, we didn't over the summer, I didn't pre-register for any of my classes.
Okay. Wow.
I didn't even know what classes were available until I set foot in the country, you know.
It's actually so cool.
Yeah. And it was more of like analog system where, you know, they posted, you know, piece of paper on the wall in the university, and they sent, you know, PDFs to us in our email and stuff of like what classes were offered and what times and stuff were getting figured out. And so there's a little bit of a period where you could choose your different classes. And one of the criteria that I used to help me choose my classes were how well I could understand the professor.
Yeah, that honestly, I was gonna ask a little bit about like the Cuban dialect, because I feel like with any language, but especially Spanish, like there's so many different dialects that, you know, it like might as well be a different language sometimes, depending on what country you're in. I definitely ran into that.
Mm-hmm.
So is the Cuban dialect generally, or at least where you were, was it like pretty fast, or was it, I don't know, what was the, because when I was thinking about it, it was like a pretty slow and like clear dialect, but I don't think that's the case for a lot of people. Yeah.
No, I mean, Cuban Spanish, I feel like was pretty difficult to get used to, you know. I mean, I don't have a ton of experience with like hearing different Spanish dialects. I only know what I've seen online. I only know what other people have said and stuff. But from what other people say, Cuban Spanish and Caribbean Spanish in general is pretty fast and a little bit hard to understand. And I can kind of confirm that, you know. There's a lot of, you know, each dialect of Spanish has its own regional slang, and Cuba definitely does, you know, which was really cool and fun to learn, you know, especially when I'm connecting with friends in my classes and stuff.
Yeah.
But there's also like a lot of different ways in which they speak. Like they will speak fast and also say some words differently. Like it's not like they have that many different words for things. There are some things where it's like, oh, you know, I remember learning in Spanish class that like, you know, popcorn was palomitas, but here, you know, when I see a little cart in the street, it says rositas de maíz, you know? And so there are these little differences like here and there. Peanut is one of them also that they say a little bit differently in Cuba, but now I'm forgetting what they had these little bars. Anyway. Mani molido was this one thing. There was this little like block, and like mani molido literally means like ground peanuts. And it was like interesting. It was kind of like peanut butter, but not quite.
Huh.
Anyway. Yeah, it was a little bit tricky to understand. So it felt a little bit rough at times, you know, and I remember especially in like the first half of my semester there, I was like, man, like I wish I could make more friends. Like I'm feeling a little bit down, like connecting, like trying to connect with people, and it's not really working too well, you know. Because you know, you do have that, it's hard to have a conversation with someone, you know, especially if like, you know, they don't know too much English, and like your Spanish isn't the greatest also. Even though Cuban Spanish was pretty difficult to understand, I still made a lot of meaningful connections with people. And in the end, one person who I actually had the hardest time understanding at the beginning of my semester is still one of the people I can keep in touch with today.
That's so cool. And that's such a good feeling. Like, I feel like I felt that way too, where I was like, it's almost so frustrating because you want to connect with people so bad, but you feel like you're like, the depth of your relationships is just kind of stifled by literally limited vocabulary. But then it's just like so much more rewarding because then you have to like really make that intention to become friends with somebody. It's not something that just like comes easy. It's something that you're working for. And I think that's really cool.
Totally.
Yeah. One thing that I kind of wanted to talk to you about that we had kind of talked about previously was like traveling within Cuba. In a lot of programs, students, go and travel to a bunch of different countries in the area, but you didn't necessarily have that option. So I didn't know if you wanted to talk about your experience traveling within Cuba and sort of ease of entry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's one thing I remember thinking about when considering a few of the different programs I was thinking about doing in terms of my study for my study abroad semester and everything. And Cuba, I remember before I went, seeing that it's like, yeah, well, I'm not going to be able to do that much travel to other places and stuff. It is very close to the US, so like the closest place I probably could have traveled to would be Miami.
Yeah.
But I would say, honestly, being in Cuba was fulfilling enough for me, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, I just to the point that I want to go back. I left feeling like I haven't seen enough.
Yeah.
And Cuba is the biggest island of the Caribbean, you know, and yet I feel like is kind of also the most understood and very kind of shrouded in mystery for many Americans.
Yeah.
Many Americans, I feel like, don't really understand what life is like in Cuba. They don't understand the situation there to a full extent. And I think that there's a lot of cool experience to be had there and a lot of beautiful people and beautiful, beautiful nature that you can see. And it was kind of fulfilling enough for me to be able to travel inside Cuba. The thing I was saying to you a little bit earlier was that Cuba, so with my program, I actually was not able to travel outside the country, even if I wanted to.
Right.
I couldn't go to like Jamaica or Puerto Rico or whatever, because if you have a student visa, as I did in Cuba, and you leave the country, then your student visa expires, and you won't be able to come back in unless you reapply for that visa and everything.
Right.
And that would pretty much like end your study abroad in Cuba, and you'd probably have to go back home. So I didn't leave Cuba, but I sure did travel around a good deal, and I saw mainly only the western half of the island, since Havana is, pretty close to southern Florida. It's the capital of Cuba, and that's where I was living, and we traveled around a little bit. We went to Matanzas, which is a city nearby that has some interesting history. We went to Varadero, which is this beach town, very, very, very touristy.
Okay.
And took a few excursions out into the neighboring provinces, and went to saw Pinar del Rio in the western, far western part of the country, where there's a little bit more mountains and they grow a lot of tobacco, and it's a really, really picturesque part of the country. But one excursion I feel like that I really, really enjoyed was going to this little permaculture farm in the country.
Interesting.
With my program, actually, with IFSA.
Ask. Whereas most of your traveling with IFSA or like with friends? Okay.
So I did a couple experiences with just friends and a couple experiences with IFSA and everything. One of the experiences actually with IFSA that was pretty rewarding was me and some of the Americans went on this trip. All the excursions were optional also, by the way. As long as you can fit it into your class schedule, on the weekends, you were free to go wherever you want.
Yeah.
Navigating the country is a whole nother story. But this one permaculture farm in the kind of countryside in Cuba was super, super cool, because we went out there and we're speaking in Spanish to the owners of this permaculture farm. One of them was Cuban, one of them was Nicaraguan, and I believe there was another immigrant from Peru that was there participating. And we arrived in the morning. We left early from Havana, went out to the countryside. I stayed awake, listening to music, and watching the lush countryside roll by. And we get there and hike around this, beautiful farm, and even end up helping them plant some of the crops that they were preparing for the winter. There were some plantain stalks that they gave to us, and it was like, all right, here's a hoe, let's get after it.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a cool experience, because got myself a little workout, and then they fed us lunch like after, and it was all food like that they'd grown like, all right there. And man, it was delicious. It was so rewarding. So
that is rewarding. That was like my city rep program. Which, it is like such a workout. I remember coming back feeling like shredded, honestly, but there's something very cool about like growing
feeling
your
stronger
own
the
food.
next day.
Yeah, seriously, that's very cool.
Yeah.
I feel like I had another question and now I can't remember what it was. But
maybe something about understanding politics of Cuba, or understanding the people there, talking with them.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely talk about that. You had said you think Cuba's kind of misunderstood. Maybe how did you come to understand it? How did you come to know it?
Yeah. One thing I remember thinking before going and studying abroad in Cuba is that there's so many things that I feel like I still have trouble understanding about Cuba, namely, like, how does their political system operate? Like, is it like really an oppressive regime? Like, there are some people on the left that like kind of tend to glorify Cuba and say that, this works so well. And I kind of, at the end of the day, wanted to say, like, I'm going to go there and see for myself.
Yeah.
And through my classes and through talking with people, and sometimes just sitting on a park bench and having spending 2 hours talking to some guy that I knew, I really kind of understood Cuba's situation, I feel like, a little bit better. And so my key takeaways are that, Cuba is very much a struggling country. It is going through a rough time for sure right now. In the news, as of recording, only a few months ago, they've suffered some major blackouts.
Yeah.
And this is largely due to their energy grid being very reliant on natural gas, which they don't have a lot of reserves of, and have a hard time importing.
Gotcha.
And Cuba has more of a close relationship with Nicaragua, Venezuela, and then, of course, like across the seas, Russia and China.
Yeah.
And they, will import gas from these other allies of theirs.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the way that the U.S. sanctions work is very, very, very deep. It's once you start digging, you realize that the rabbit hole goes like much further. And learning about the economics impacts of the embargo was really interesting. Namely, one thing in particular I'll briefly bring up is that the United States says that when a Cuban ship docks in a port in Cuba, then that ship is not allowed to dock anywhere in any port in the United States for 6 months after that. Really? Okay. Yeah. And so that means that it doesn't really matter if you're, France, if you're China, if you're Venezuela, most countries would rather send their cargo ships to the biggest economy in the world, which is right next door, rather than a very poor one that is relatively small and has much less to offer from a selfish perspective for that country. Yeah. So it puts Cuba in a really tough spot. But understanding that was really, really cool. And also understanding Cuban culture through the lens of my friends, going out for drinks with them and dancing was so much fun. So much fun. Yeah. And one experience that I feel like I'll never forget is this guy I met, Oresti, through this program that IFSA actually connected with. Okay. There was this one coffee shop in Havana, and that was run by a couple people from New York, actually.
Okay.
I think they moved. It was a couple of New Yorkers that moved to Havana like 15 years ago and started up this coffee shop, and kind of wanted it to be like a point of exchange for Cubans and Americans to connect. And IFSA partnered with this coffee shop, Cuba Libro, which is a play in the common phrase like Cuba Libre, like, free Cuba and everything. But like, books for Cuba or whatever. Yeah. So they were like kind of a little coffee shop / bookstore / library, whatever. Okay. And had this program where if you were Cuban who wanted to learn English, you could come to this coffee shop and they'd pair you up with one of the American students. Cool. And we would just have conversations in English and kind of be like this, it was like unpaid, but like just free, informal, language tutor and stuff. Okay. And they had books you could read and things you could talk about and stuff. And I ended up being paired with this guy, Oresti, which I believe is like Orestes, like a Greek name or something. Yeah. But there's so many interesting names also in Cuba. I've never heard that. One of the people in my host family was this guy, Lester. Lester was this one guy. Anyway, Oresti was really cool and was really into environmentalism and did the different native plants and tree species and stuff in Cuba. And we really ended up having a really cool connection. And got to sit down and talk for coffee and went out and had lunch a few times and talked about different native plant species in Cuba. And it's been something that I've been interested in the United States, like knowing the plant species and bird species and stuff, like where I'm from in Central Texas. And then doing that a little bit on my own, trying to do some bird identification in Cuba while also having someone to talk to about that kind of stuff was a really, really rewarding experience. So.
Well, that's so cool. It's those things, I don't know, I feel like with studying abroad, it's always going to be local connections, and I don't know, I feel like where you learn the most, but that's so cool. Like sometimes I feel like nobody really leaves for study abroad knowing where they're going to end up, who they're going to meet, and I think that's so cool. All right, well, if you had one piece of advice for somebody who's about to go study abroad, what would it be? I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, well, I guess I'd say don't be afraid to challenge yourself. Don't be afraid to put yourself in a situation that you think might make you uncomfortable, because who knows, you could learn a whole lot, and chances are you probably will. So
definitely. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Gavin.
Cool, yeah.
And thanks for tuning in to the Do You Study Abroad podcast.